Welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. I'm Casey Scott. The guy laughing over in the corner is Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist.
I am.
Don't let the giggles fool you. That guy's educated.
Dude, you crack me up every time we hang out.
Well, we were trying to figure out how to get into the podcast. For the past 5 years, I've been saying podcast Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, more importantly about recovery, because that's what we wanted it to be, is to focus on recovery.
Right.
Unfortunately, you have to kind of go through the addiction to get there.
Well, yeah.
But we want this to be a preventative one as well, to help you maybe not go down that road. And if you're doing it, was it pre-contemplation? Is that what you're talking about?
Sure.
And that's before. Would you pre-contemplate before an addiction?
So people who are in pre-contemplation usually don't really know that. They may be having people tell them they ought to watch their drinking or whatever. But,
I had that.
Yeah, but contemplation is when you start thinking, maybe there's something to that. Maybe I ought to do something about it.
Now, if I think back over my 25, 30 years of drinking, I started when I was 14.
Right.
I quit when I was 45.
Yep.
We had some good months, we had some good years, and we had some bad months and some really bad years. And there were certain times that people would say, hey, you really like to drink. And I remember in my brain, I would think, yeah, I really do. And, and it's crazy because I was at the gym this morning working out, and I was thinking 5 years ago, right before I got sober. And I remember sitting in the rooms of 12-step meetings and sitting there in the recovery house and thinking to myself, how am I going to do this? I cannot imagine a world that I don't get a drink in. I can't imagine that it'll be any fun. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that anything good's going to come out of it. I mean, I really did. I was like, they're trying to take away the only fun that I have. Mm-hmm. Because I couldn't control it. But what if I can control it? Yeah. And I told myself that lie many years, and I never could.
I can just control it. And then it's not just the fun, but I think a lot of people don't realize they've become addicted to, this is their method of stress reduction. It's my reward at the end of a long day. If I'm tired, if I'm stressed, this is how I unwind, whatever their substance is, right?
I think you said it best right there, and I considered it my reward. Yeah. It was a reward for a hard day's work. Mm-hmm. It was a reward for getting through a tough conversation. It was a reward for a birth of a child. It was a reward for a birthday, another trip around the sun, if you will, or whatever it may be. It was always a reward. But towards the end, it wasn't a reward. Mm-mm. It was a punishment.
Right.
But
it's still hard to shift that thinking. Like, remember, thoughts lead to feelings, lead to behaviors. Mm-hmm. So that thinking part still trips people up, even though they might start to recognize that life isn't working out well. They're having a hard time letting go of, this is my reward. I need it.
I'm owed it.
Yeah.
And that's really where my mind started to go, is like, I'm owed this. I put up through all this other BS throughout the day, the year, whatever it may be. I'm owed this.
Yeah.
This is my relief. This is my reward for enduring all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is it wasn't. It was a punishment. And so 5 years ago, I thought I'd never live in a world where I couldn't have alcohol. Now I can't think about living in a world where I have to have alcohol. It would not fit my lifestyle right now. It would not fit it by any stretch of the meaning.
No, it wouldn't. Our show would be over, by the way. But or you'd be the best guest we ever had. But what about this? Like, what do you remember the moment? So you're talking about, like, before you stopped drinking, thinking about, like, this is my fun. They want to take away my fun, right? Common thought. Do you remember once you got sober, the first time you realized, wait a second, I'm having fun for real, but I'm sober?
Yeah. I mean, I had glimpses of fun, and that's what they try to do in recovery for me. Like, I remember
past recovery, like once you left recovery, because recovery's great, but it's an artificial environment, just like the hospital is. We can all get better in those places for a while. But once you were out on your own, do you remember the first time, or one of the first times, when you were like, I'm genuinely happy and having fun, and I'm not drinking?
Yeah. It was a ski day with my kids.
Yeah.
And I used to dread ski days with my kids, because if you've ever had to get 3 kids ready to go up on a freezing cold mountain and make sure they got all their boots and all their gloves, it was a lot.
That's a lot of work. Yeah.
And I would drink. And it would
Which
help.
always made it easier, right?
No, but I thought it did. But it would help me get through the day, and because I felt like I had to do this, but I wasn't authentically, genuinely there.
You can't be present when you're drinking.
And I remember sitting on top of the mountain, and I look to the left, and there's my son Bowden, and he's got goggles on, and they're only half on because at that time he had glasses as well. So it's like half a glass is hanging out of a goggle. They're a little askewed.
Totally picture it.
And I look over him, and he can't say anything. He's got one of those mouth guards on. He just gives me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
I look to the right, and there's my 2 daughters, and they got their helmets on, and I looked at them, and they gave me thumbs up. And I remember feeling so happy inside that this was a thing that I get to do now. Because before, I didn't think I would ever get that opportunity again.
Yeah.
And we were genuinely having a good time. And I remember, I'm getting a little, but I remember just skiing down the mountain and sitting there over a plate of loaded fries with cheese and chili and all that good stuff and thinking, how lucky am I that I get to do this? And before, I felt like I had to do this. I had to check these boxes. I had to take them up and give them this, but felt like I was...
It felt effortful, and I think a lot of that's because when a person's drinking or otherwise intoxicated, they're not present. They're not there. And if you're not present, you can't connect with people. And so you might have a lot of people are doing things with their kids, but are they really connecting with the kids? I think what you're describing to me, I would say, is like an emotional connection that you weren't having before.
In years past, we would have got the loaded fries, and we would have done skiing.
Sure.
But we'd have pulled into the lodge. I would have got the loaded fries. I'd have set them on the table, and then I would have walked around the corner to the bar and ordered a beer and a shot. And I would have missed them guys fighting over fries. I would have missed them guys laughing and talking about wrecks they had on the mountain. And then I came back and said, "Are you guys done? Let's go." And we'd go up again. And I wasn't authentically, genuinely there.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and I think most of the time I look back and the happiness that I've genuinely had is around my girlfriend, around my family and my kids. And before, I would use alcohol to get me through those times.
Yeah.
Which is insane to say, but it was the truth.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how the mindset shifts, right? From thinking, I'm owed this is my reward, this is the only way I can be happy, this is the way I relax, to the opposite, which is I'm present, I'm connected, and that alcohol would actually take all that away. It's that mindset shift that comes with sobriety. It's a beautiful thing.
And I'm just very blessed and grateful that I get to be in this world and I get to do the things I get to do. So when people go, "Do you think you'll ever drink again?" I go, "I don't think I will." I never say I won't, because we've talked about that before. Yeah. It just doesn't work in my mindset. But I don't think so, because the world I have right now and the life I get to live, I'm so grateful and I'm so blessed and fortunate to be able to do what I do, that it doesn't fit in my lifestyle. Nothing in a 12-ounce can is going to make my life any better than it is right now.
Yeah.
And I know that it'll only take away. And unfortunately, I'm selfish, and I don't want to give up what I've got.
Well, sometimes it's good to be selfish.
And I'm very grateful. And I'm grateful for our guests who every week come in and are willing to share their story.
Yep.
Now, we've got an amazing story today. Her name is Lyndi Murray. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fabulous. We want to find out a little bit about you. But before we do, Lyndi, how long have you been sober?
I've been sober 4 years.
But you've got a little something that helps you stay sober. What is that?
That's right, I do. I smoke marijuana. I've smoked marijuana since probably about a year and a half. Since I was sober about a year and a half before I started doing that.
So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you Lyndi's story. We're going to talk about her recovery. And when we talk about recovery here on the podcast, and I talk about my recovery because it's my recovery, it makes sense to me, and it helps me stay sober. We're to find out what Lyndi's recovery looks like and what helps her stay sober. And I want you to keep an open mind. I want you to sit back and enjoy the ride. You're listening to Project Recovery. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist, and our guest today is Lyndi Murray. She's been sober 4 years, but she smokes a little weed. Is it just a little weed or a lot of weed?
It's not a little.
So probably.
So there's one other option.
I smoke every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
And you have a medical marijuana card?
I do.
And when you go to talk to the doctor about getting a medical marijuana card, like I've talked to people before and they said insomnia, bad back, sore joints. What did you tell the doctor?
Bad back.
Do you have a bad back?
No.
It's okay.
No.
No, you're all right.
No.
But
I use it more as a mental health aid than a physical health aid.
now, if you've ever listened to the podcast before, you know Dr. Matt talks about weed. And
On my tombstone, Dr. Matt talked about weed.
okay, well, marijuana and the medicinal effects of it, and also the
Well, it's just really interesting to me because we live in a day and age that's so much different than when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, right? Like, then it was illegal everywhere and there was a war on drugs and there was a lot of misinformation then.
reefer madness.
Reefer madness, yeah. Now we have kind of done this almost 180 with many states having it legal for either recreational and or medicinal. And there's still a lot of misinformation, like what does it do? But the good news is research is happening and we're starting to learn, what are the benefits and what are not the benefits of weed. So,
Now
I am interested in it because also many of my patients are using it. And it's pretty much available everywhere to minors, to young kids. And I think they get a lot of misinformation, too.
I was talking to my daughter, who's now a freshman at the University of Utah, and we talked about this earlier on a podcast.
She in a sorority?
She's not in a sorority.
Okay.
And I wanted her to, but she's like, yeah, Dad, it's not my style.
I'm with her.
Yeah, and I get it. I was in a fraternity, and I loved it, and those guys are still my friends.
Yeah, you were just playing Nickelback before we started the show. Yeah.
My nickname in college was Fun Pig, because Fun Pigs never say no.
C
No,
Money.
C Money was in high school.
Oh,
Fun Pig.
Fun
in college.
Pig, you upgraded.
Well, I've been C Money, Fun Pig, Helmet, and Scott Dog.
I don't want to know why your helmet.
Well, it's because my hair looked like a helmet when I was in football days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
good.
anyways, and I was talking to my daughter, and I was like, is alcohol, a big deal for kids your age? And she goes, Dad, not so much.
Not as much, yeah.
It's most people are vaping.
THC.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or edibles, if you will.
Edibles are really popular, yeah.
And so I don't think they do that, but we're digressing. So I wanted to get back to Lyndi Murray, and she says that marijuana helps her in her recovery. But before we find out about that, where does the story of Lyndi Murray begin?
My addiction story started when I was 16. I started drinking. And, throughout the years, I drank a lot and eventually started using pills and drugs and heroin. And
Do you remember at 16 why you started drinking? Was it we've had people on the podcast who said they had anxiety, they didn't fit in, or they were just plain curious. Why did you start drinking?
It's what we did. I was born in a small town or raised in a small town, and what you got drunk or you got pregnant, and I don't have any kids. So
Specialized in the other, huh?
yeah.
What was your family culture like? Do you have a lot of siblings? Was drinking part of your family culture?
Yeah, I have a little sister. My mom didn't drink a whole lot when we were young, but she did drink. My stepdad drinks quite a bit. My father was an alcoholic, so.
So with that did you know as a teenager that Dad was an alcoholic?
I did.
How did your parents talk? Did they talk about it, or was that just something you observed?
Yeah, they did. It was talked about because they separated when I was still pretty young, and I knew why. And I knew that he was sick. That's what they told me when I was a kid. And I knew that it was predispositioned in me. Like my mom had said that, hey, this comes from both sides of your family. I have grandparents on my mom's side, and I just didn't. I was 16. I'm like, okay.
But that's pretty great that your mom tried to educate you about that, because that's one of the things we talk about on the show is that, conversations make a big difference. Those, advertisements about talk to your kids, there's actually research that supports that helps. But when you're 16, most of us think we're invincible and that won't bother me. And
I think I was better able to recognize when it did become a problem. Because I'm like, oh, this is how unhealthy people drink, and that's what I'm doing now. You know what I mean? So
that education was helpful eventually.
Yeah, eventually. It just at the time.
Yeah.
But you're 16, so you started drinking. You said drinking a lot, and that led you to pills. What made you do the jump from drinking to pills?
Well, my father passed away in 2015, And the person I was dating at the time, we just partied a lot. That's what we did. And there was pills at a party, and I said, okay. I was in a really vulnerable spot, and I didn't want to feel what I was feeling anymore.
And do you remember the first time you took pills? And was it like an aha moment? Did the clouds open up? Because when we've had people describe it that way.
Yeah. I mean, my face kind of just lit up. Do you remember the first time you took pills? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And I won't ever forget it because I chased it for years,
And so you started taking pills, and then did that lead you in other directions, or how long did you keep pills going for?
I used pills for a couple months, but they are expensive. I was taking oxys, and they were selling really expensive on the street, so I switched to heroin pretty quickly.
Okay, now that's interesting because
It's almost always a financial reason why people switch from pills to heroin, but I'm curious about, I think where Casey was going with that is like in your mindset, like, a pill, it comes in a bottle from the pharmacy. Like, even though we know we're buying it illegally or doing it feels a little more legit. Heroin has just this whole culture ominously.
Now, this is going to sound weird, but pills seem like a healthier drug.
Yeah, in a
that's
sense
what
I'm hitting. That's,
that
100%.
I'm getting these drugs from a doctor. They're making them in a lab.
I mean, my friend gave them to me, but I mean, they're legit, right?
This is not black tar heroin that was smuggled across the border in some guy's butt.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but you're right.
Well, I mean,
that's true.
I don't know how it gets here.
I watched Narcos. I think you're right.
So we were sick. I was sick, and we were trying to get pills.
So even
and
after
Dope sick.
3 months, you were already dope sick.
Oh yeah. Because we were smoking pills every day, and then drinking on top of that. I just wasn't healthy in the first place. But I wasn't dope sick the way that I remember now, but I was sick to the point that it was like, we've got to find something. It was that fight or flight. Like we've got to survive this day, and how are we going to do that? Because we couldn't find pills. And it's like, well, so-and-so has black. And I'm like, what is that? And the guy I was with, he says, that's heroin. It's a lot cheaper, and it's going to hit a lot harder. And I said, all right. Here, we're already down here. We're in this city. We drove to the city to pick up. And yeah.
Okay, now you vividly remember the first time you took pills. Mm-hmm. Do you have the same memory of the first time you took heroin?
Not really. I mean, I can't place that very first time. I can't put myself in this situation and remember it, but I can remember it with the pill. Because it was like that first time.
So when you started using heroin, before we get to that, what was your family life at home up to this point? Had anybody said, "Hey, Lyndi, what's going on?"
No, not with drinking or anything, no. I didn't present like an alcoholic, I was functioning and whatever. I just drank on the weekends and drank excessively when I did it. And people were expecting me to be sad, I had like this excuse as to why I was always laying around or why I didn't have the motivation to go to work or whatever. So when I was using, it was like, well, I mean, her dad just passed away. Of course she's going to act depressed and sad, but really I was sick and I was, doing all sorts of other things.
Okay, so you start your journey with heroin. Are you smoking it? Are you?
Yeah, I'm smoking. I was never an intravenous user. I'm afraid of needles.
You're using heroin. Are you using it daily?
Yes, yeah.
And how do you afford heroin? If I mean, eventually it's got to get.
It's a lot cheaper than those pills.
It is. And I would hold a job for a little bit. Like I would have jobs for weeks at a time, or the guy I was working with, or the guy I was with would hold jobs for a little bit of time. But we started doing criminal things a lot, selling, pawning, all sorts of stuff.
And then when does that come to a head? Off air, you told me you've been to 3 different treatment centers. When was the first time you went?
Can I?
Yes.
Can I pause that question? Because it's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I'm also wondering about kind of, were you getting any help for your mental health? Obviously, you were grieving and you had lost your father. And, I think that with heavy drug or alcohol use comes depression, anxiety, that often just gets, pushed down because you're using. So I'm just kind of curious how you describe, first of all, how old of a person were you about that time when your father passed?
I was 21.
Okay. And how would you describe kind of like the mental health side of things for you?
I had received a little bit of mental health help when I was younger because I was an angry teenager. But at the time, I wasn't seeing anybody. I wasn't talking to anybody. It just, it just was something that happened, and then
just trying to manage it yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Just because you're kind of this part of your story giving off a little bit of a desperate vibe, like you're willing to try anything to numb the pain, and I think that's understandable because when we're going through depression and grief, it's a miserable feeling, and I don't blame people for wanting to run away from that. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes the things we run to are more dangerous than just dealing with the grief and depression. But yeah, okay, unpause.
So you're running and gunning, you're on the streets, you're holding down jobs sometimes weeks at a time, all to feed your fix of heroin. Mm-hmm. You said off air that you've been to 3 different treatment facilities.
Yeah.
What brought you to the first one?
The first one was mostly family influence. They're changing the locks. They're not going to answer my phone calls, etc. You need to find some help or we're not going to continue this like relationship that we have with you pretty much.
So somewhat of an intervention.
Yeah, kind of like an intervention.
And they said, if you don't get help, we're going to change the locks.
Right.
So did you reluctantly agree to the treatment center?
Yeah, we went and toured it. And the guy that was showing, I said, okay, I'll be back on Monday. He said, there's no way that girl's coming back here. And I showed back up on Monday somehow. But it was a lot of family, my sister and my mom.
And how long did you spend in that first treatment?
60 days. 60 days.
And what kind of treatment did they do? Did you talk to a psychologist? Did you do processing? Did you go to different meetings? What modalities did they use?
Yeah, we did. It was 12-step based, so we did a lot of 12-step work in-house. But we also went to meetings. We had therapy with the group. We had family therapy, processing with the family, individual sessions, just all of it.
And what was your first thought? I mean, because we often say on the podcast, if they don't want it, it's never going to take.
Yeah. I really wanted to want it because I hated myself. I didn't like who I was. I didn't like what I was doing. And I'm lucky that my family never believed that that's like who I was. They knew that whoever was acting out and being this like addict wasn't the person that I actually am. But I was willing. Once I got there, I think I was pretty willing.
You graduate after 60 days. You go back into the real world. What does that look like?
Sober living. I started with sober living and outpatient treatment. So I went, every day for several hours a day. I wasn't really working. I was at the sober living, which has like a curfew and testing and all those things.
But you relapsed.
Yeah, I moved back home to my small town, which was full of the same people and the same problems, and everybody was still getting drunk. And so I got drunk again, and that eventually led right back to heroin.
So how long were you out on this journey?
Oh, this second time around was pretty. I was running and gunning for a good long while, and I only went back to treatment for a couple weeks because it was like, it was kind of like a
refresher course.
Yeah, and I didn't want to quit drinking. I told him that. I'm like, I'm not gonna stop drinking. So if you want me to go back in there, okay. But it was what is that when they make you or else?
Forced choice.
Yeah. It was
So you go back in for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, do you check yourself out, or do they tell you?
Yeah, I left AMA against medical advice.
Ultimatum. That's what you were
Ultimatum.
after.
That
There
is the
we
word
go.
I was thinking of.
And then you leave AMA, which is against medical advice.
Yeah.
And that's where the therapist, and I've been in a treatment facility where somebody leaves AMA.
Yeah, that happens at the psychiatric hospitals and any hospital, really. Yeah.
Well, and so I think that's important to talk about real quick before we get back to Lyndy's story is, parents, when I was working at the recovery center, would be like, hey, you got to keep my kid. I go, we can't. it's illegal. If they want to leave, they can leave whenever they want. And so they'll do their best to keep them here. You'll get people on the phone. You'll get a therapist. I mean, and
there's usually, trying to, when a person wants to leave against medical advice and they're an adult, typically, unless we can prove that they're going to be a danger to someone,
which is a 5150.
Yep, 5150 Van Halen. And if we can prove that, we can sometimes have a judge order a stay for a period of time. But to be honest, that doesn't happen as often as you think it might. Usually it's just a real caring group. The treatment team will sit down with the person and try to explain, listen, these are the reasons why we'd like you to stay, and these are the things we can do for you. Trying to force a person to stay, usually we know doesn't ever, you're just in that same position after the court order runs out. So it's real sad. I've been on that side of it when I used to work inpatient, and you feel sort of like a failure as a clinician, and you feel worried about your patient that's going to leave.
Because if they walk out, I mean, usually bad stuff's about to happen.
Yeah, they're usually leaving because either their mental health hasn't been appropriately treated, and so they're not in their best mind, or they're,
beelining it for drugs or alcohol.
They're headed right to the liquor store or someplace like that. So it's a tough situation for everybody. But from your point of view, why do you feel like you pushed through that medical advice and left?
Because I knew I wasn't done at that point. Because like I had said, I was drinking, and I wanted to keep drinking, and I wanted to be able to drink.
Because drinking wasn't your problem.
Right. I mean, it was, of course. I just didn't know it yet.
Well, it sounds like it was sort of a gateway for you to get back into the harder drugs.
Yeah, easily.
And so they sit you down. They tell you, we don't think it's a good idea for you to leave. You tell them you don't care.
Yeah, I said, cool.
And busted right out. Mm-hmm. And where did you go? I
just went to the streets, and I don't think I even drank. I think I went straight for drugs. I remember in my brain knowing that I wasn't done drinking, but I don't think that's what I did when I left.
And you went to the streets and you got drugs. And so then how long are you out on this run?
Several years. I was just, running and gunning and trying to do whatever, sleeping in my car, sleeping on couches. I don't, the whole nine.
What's that life look like? I know you say it's hard and you kind of just gloss over it.
Yeah.
But I mean, 3 years living on the streets, living in your car, sleeping on people's couches. What goes through your mind?
Looking back on it, I just am so sad for that girl, and I had nothing pushing me to want anything better. I was ready to just be out there and die like that, pretty much. So there was no want to find a place to live or find a good job or.
Sounds like you were just in survival mode.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
You said something earlier about not liking yourself, so something to that effect. And I think that's such a common theme when a person is on the run, they're homeless, they're using drugs and alcohol. It just destroys your self-esteem, that confidence and identity that you have. And so it's really interesting. You'd think maybe from an outsider's point of view that when a person feels low self-esteem, low confidence, that they would get busy building themselves back up, but it's almost always the opposite, right? You become at least passively kind of suicidal, not caring what happens to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so instead of getting the house and getting the job and cleaning up, it kind of goes the opposite direction.
It's this is who I am, and this is what I'll
just
be
whatever
then.
happens to me. So you stop caring about yourself because that self-love, self-compassion is gone.
I'm curious if this ever happened to you, because it happened to me when I was handcuffed to a gurney in a hospital, and I saw my reflection in the mirror, and I couldn't recognize the person staring back at me.
Yeah, I remember, because I used all sorts of substances. Heroin was my DOC. I eventually started using crack. I used meth sometimes, and I remember standing in the mirror in a bathroom. The lights were off, but it was light enough to see myself, and I was there. I don't know how long I was there. I was there for hours, just staring and crying and looking at these pick marks on my face and not knowing who this was or how to fix her.
Or how you got there.
Yeah, how it happened.
So you're on the streets, living on couches, living in your car for, what'd you say, about 3 years?
Yeah, a few years.
Were any contact with your parents?
I was in contact with my mom almost always. One thing she did do is keep my phone on. I was really lucky that way with the way that she supported me because she learned a lot. She had learned through my dad, and then as soon as I started having a problem, she went and got, education. Mm-hmm. So she kept my phone on, but she didn't give me money. She didn't do stuff like that.
But probably for a peace of mind for herself,
100%.
For you to call in time of need, or at least to know.
A little lifeline.
Yeah, that I was alive.
So what brings you to the third and final treatment center?
So the last time I went to treatment was the end of 2019. And, man, I was just tired. My heart was tired. I was tired. I was afraid. At that point, I knew that if I didn't get sober right now, then I'm going to die out here. And that's just what I'm going to do. So it really was a life and death situation at this point. And I felt that in my heart too. So I had to do something.
We've had many people on the podcast who said before they got sober, they were sick and tired of being sick and tired. I mean, the game had just run its course.
Yeah.
And you come to that final decision. Either I get help or I die. Mm-hmm. And what's that like when that actually processes through your brain that you go, this is it. I've got two choices.
Yeah. I've never been more afraid because I knew I had to make changes and I didn't know what that was going to look like or how hard it was going to be. I knew it was going to be harder than anything else I had ever done, So I was really, really afraid. I don't think I've ever been that scared of something. I was scared to go into the building.
So who do you call? Where do you go?
My mom. I called my mom.
And
I said, I got to go. So I got to do something. And she showed up the very next morning, and she helped call some of the contacts that we had, and we just got in. I managed to get a scholarship in because I had just turned 26. I just turned 26, so I wasn't on my mommy's insurance anymore. Yeah.
So you check into a treatment center. Mm-hmm. How many days do you do in there?
In that one I only did 30 days in that last one.
What was different about this time?
I finally wanted it. I finally wanted to stop being that person.
But is it easy as just saying I finally wanted it? Were you still hesitant, resistant?
Yeah. The hardest part I think was the self-love part of it. And in this last treatment center, I finally took that seriously. I did what they told me to do. I didn't ask questions. They said, look in the mirror and say I love you. And I'm like, that's stupid, but I'm going to do it. So I did it, and I did what I was told, and I followed the program, and I worked really hard in there. I put a lot of work in while I was there. But yeah, it wasn't as easy as just being like, okay, I think I'm good now,
But I think you can correct me if this doesn't apply to you, but I think that there's an underlying commitment that's lacking until you say I want it.
Yeah.
You might be just as scared and the work is going to be hard, but I do think that's what gets a person through is feeling that desperate, rock bottom feeling of like, I've got to do something and I really want to be better. Mm-hmm. And I think that underlying emotional commitment to that is what gets you to do the silly things like look in the mirror and say, I love you, because you're thinking, well, how could that help? And, and all these silly things they have me do, my drug problems, but, you do those things because you've got a commitment to yourself and to being sober. And that's, I think, the fuel that's missing in treatment, when people relapse.
One of the things we did when I was in treatment, we started our day with intentions, mm-hmm. and we ended it with gratitude. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in this house with 15 other addicts, knowing that I lost my job, possibly going to jail, lost all these things, and they want you to sit down and write 3 things you're grateful for.
You lost that cool podcast with your friend.
Yeah, I lost that podcast with Dr. Matt.
Yeah.
But there you go. Now you're 3 things you're grateful for. And I'm like, oh. And it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough to come up with 3.
Because you're so focused on all the problems and the stress and the trauma that you've been through.
But then you start to realize, I'm grateful for this opportunity to be in this house. I'm grateful to sit on this couch. I'm grateful that I had a hot meal. I'm grateful that I know my kids are okay right now. And then you start to build upon that. And so those little silly things of looking yourself in the mirror and telling yourself, I love you, start to build because you realize that there is stuff around that you can build upon. And that's kind of what it is. And so after 30 days, you graduate. Where do you go?
At that time, I had an apartment with a couple of friends, and they kept it for me. So I went back and moved back in with them. It was in Utah County, and that's where I found recovery in the first place. So I was hitting a lot of meetings, and by this point, I've been to treatment enough, and I'd seen a lot of therapists, so I knew what to do. I knew the tools that I needed to use, and I finally was willing to use them.
And so you start using these tools, and you start to get a little sobriety underneath your belt. You come up on 1.5 years.
Yeah.
And you decided to add a new tool.
Yeah.
Which is this is your recovery. I don't want you to feel like I'm coming at you or anything.
Right, yeah.
But you say that marijuana has really helped you in your recovery. Tell me how and why.
First, I think it's important to note that I didn't smoke weed, but when I was using other things, I didn't like it. It made me feel paranoid. It never was a thing for me until after I got sober and after I had been abstinent from all substances for a while that I chose to start using it. A lot of the people that I knew were smoking. And what I found it did for me is when you hit that spot where you're kind of spiraling and the only focus is like the drug or the problem that you're having, whatever it is, weed kind of allowed me to zoom out and just change my perspective a little bit.
Oh, I was looking to you because I thought you had something locked and loaded.
No, not at all. I appreciate you sharing your experience with that. So you feel like in those, so 1.5 years is both a lot of sobriety and not very much, right? Like it's kind of that awkward in between time.
Like when you're growing your hair out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do. I think it's a little more serious than that, but not,
No, but it's not long, but it's not short.
It's not long, but it's not short.
Awkward. You don't know how to do it.
It's real awkward.
It's kind of fluffy.
It was a good analogy.
It was great.
The helmet looks kind of like
the
a
helmet.
helmet.
Helmet's
that's what
back.
I had.
Yeah. Well, if we all had curls like you, but what was going on that made you feel like I need something more than you mentioned you went to meetings and what was,
so I think I would never say anything bad about AA. It's what taught me how to be sober and like be a person in this world. But there's a lot of culture there that's like, this is what we do and we do it every day and you're going to have to do this for the rest of your life. And, it's just very
militant.
Yeah. It's
highly structured.
Yeah, it is. And not that structure was always good for me.
Well, you mentioned that phrase, this is what you do for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I've found that whether we're talking about mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment or almost anything, when you feel like, I have to do something for the rest of my life in order to be okay, people, instead of grasping onto that, a lot of people push away. And I've seen that in therapy too. That's why a lot of times if a person is hesitant to ever go in and start talking with a therapist, I remind them, you could just go for 2 visits or 4.
Yeah.
You don't have to go for the rest of your life. And they're like, well, I know. But emotionally, we kind of wonder, am I going to have to be committed to something for the rest of my life? And I've heard lots of people say pretty much what you just said, where they're like, I appreciate what AA did for me, but I couldn't commit to like this idea of having to be in meetings every day for the rest of my life.
There's also this, where I was at was a lot of young recovery because there was a lot of treatment centers. So it's a lot of people that just, are fresh out of rehab or have a couple months or whatever. And a lot of those same people are going to the meetings too. So I'm kind of reaching this spot where I'm getting uncomfy again in my skin. I'm starting to experience some of that like post-withdrawal stuff, and I'm thinking a lot more about drugs. I'm having using dreams, things like that. And there's not a whole lot of people at the meeting that are relating to me. There's the people that have a couple months and there's people that have 40 years. And I'm like, what do I do here? So it just, I was having a hard time finding that, like, the relation that I needed that I had when I first got to AA, I guess.
The community had changed
the connection.
a little bit. Yeah.
So how do you feel marijuana helps you every day?
So I smoke probably about a joint a day.
How did you get the idea though? Like, okay, you just set it up perfectly to be like, I felt kind of in between. My hair's not long or short. My community has shifted. I'm not quite feeling the benefit. I'm having these dreams and urges. Mm-hmm. So how did the idea come? Like, maybe I'll try marijuana, because I think a lot of people would not want to go towards another substance that.
Well, it's not a new idea. I mean, people have been doing it for years. They call it Cali sober. They don't. I mean, it's a real thing. Yeah. Demi Lovato would tout it. That was her recovery. She was Cali sober, and it was like I smoked marijuana, and
so you're a big Demi Lovato fan.
Yeah, I love her. Love them.
No, I'm just kind of curious how that came to be like an idea that you thought you'd
some
try.
of the people that I was around were smoking and also in recovery, and it wasn't presenting any problems for them. Okay.
Did you have conversations with them before you tried it, or did you try it then have conversations?
I had conversations before, because I was like, I don't like it. It makes me feel weird, but it didn't anymore. Suddenly it was not paranoid. It was relaxed.
So you say you smoke a joint a day, and it just helps you manage the day. Does it help you end the day? Is it a reward? I'm curious.
Yeah. Quite frankly, I just feel like I'm more pleasant. I'm just a happier person that's existing out in this world, because life feels so crazy and so stressful, and the world right now is so scary that it's like if I don't smoke, all of that stuff starts to come to my brain. I don't want to make it sound like I have to, because I don't. I'll go days without smoking, but it just kind of quiets the whole world down a little bit, helps manage the day.
So it sounds like part of that is managing the anxiety and kind of how you think.
Yeah.
Would you say you're one of those people that has kind of the brain that doesn't turn off at night and the worries kind of stack up?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in recovery start to develop some of this anxiety or some of these, like I have the, OCD tendencies and things like that I've developed since I've been sober, and I think it happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, it does. And in fact, we've talked on the show about, we, as a young person growing up, an adolescent, young adult, we learn our coping skills.
Yeah.
But if you start using substances like drinking at 16 or 14, like Casey did, then that can start to become like you're a one-trick pony. You're like, well, that's how I manage my stress. So you think, okay, great, I'm going to get sober. I'm not going to have that anymore. But now it's sort of like I'm dealing with the world without coping skills. Yeah. And so that can be daunting, anxiety provoking. Absolutely.
Now you say something like that because, for the longest time, alcohol was my only coping tool. It's the way I rewarded and punished myself. Now I use the gym. Now I use golf. Now I use, talking to a therapist. I've got more tools in my belt that I never had before.
Right.
And so I can see this as a tool for her.
Yeah.
And so once again, I want to. This is your recovery, and I'm proud of you. And to see all you've gone through and seeing here now, what does your life look like now?
I live on my own. I have a cute little space that's all mine, and it feels really safe. I make my bed every day, just like I did in treatment. I have a little kitty, a nice job. I have health insurance. I'm insured on my car. All of the. I'm a triple threat with the car. I've got the license, insurance, registration.
Wow,
nice. So, yeah. So
I dare them to pull me over.
I live a pretty normal life, and my relationships with my family have been, they were damaged. They were very damaged, and they just, I spend a lot of time with them. I'm around them all the time. These days, I live very close to them, and they've been repaired, I'm closer to my family than I ever have been.
We've talked about this on the podcast before, but do you remember them telling you, imagine what you want your sobriety to look like in 5 years?
Yeah.
What did you want yours to look like in 5 years?
Oh, gosh. I wrote myself a letter. I'm going to have to find that. I wrote myself a letter of what I thought it would look like. But this, not this.
But do you think your life is better than you imagined it to be?
Yeah, 100%. I don't know really what I imagined. It was hard to see any type of future.
There you go. I was just going to say, I think a lot of people lowball themselves when they get asked that question in treatment, like 5 years, and they're like, well, I'll have shoes.
Right.
You know, like the bar is pretty low, but then you start living a life of recovery and you realize, wow, there's so much more life available to me than I really gave myself credit for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I look at a beautiful, confident young lady and somebody who's rocking their recovery and doing wonderful. And as one addict to another, I know what you've gone through. I might not know exactly, but I know the feelings. I know the darkness. I know the isolation. I know the tears. And to see you standing here today and willing to share your story, I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Matt, what are your thoughts on Lyndi?
First of all, I'll just echo his statements. It takes a lot of courage, and it's a selfless act, I think, to come on this show and share your story, because other people are going to really benefit from hearing how you've gone through your process. So I appreciate that. I'm kind of curious, other than using marijuana to help you avoid those spirals, do you have other practices or regular things you do?
Yeah.
I know you're close with your family, but is there anything more?
Yeah, I still see a therapist a couple times a month. I really like to read and write, and I've started doing some, art and things like that. Something that just gets me to be present in the moment.
Kind of mindfulness activity?
Yeah, meditation, stuff like that. I'm not great at meditating. A lot of times meditating looks like painting to me, because I'm there.
Well, I think creative activities. So you might want to check out the book Flow.
Okay.
By Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. That's his name.
Bless you.
I could remember Flow.
Flow, yeah, remember Flow.
Okay.
I just like to say the name because it took me a while to practice it, so I like to whip it out.
You're the kind of guy that would practice
once in a
that
while.
name. I'm like Lyndi. I'm like, Flow's the name of the book.
Yeah,
Google it.
But the idea of flow comes out of research on happiness. What makes people really happy? To make a long story short, what they found was that there are about 8 factors that bring us into the moment. It's a very mindful approach. And when we're painting or we're doing other things like that, problem solving, being creative, that's often when we feel the most at peace and therefore the happiest, most content. And so absolutely your painting or journaling or writing, those things absolutely count as a mindful, meditative activity that can create this concept of flow. So I actually don't recommend tons of books to people because I don't know, a lot of books seem like a waste of time. Flow would be one of those books everybody should read.
I love it.
I'll check it out.
Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for sharing your story. And I think you're going to help a lot of people. And good luck in the future. And I can't wait to see what you do.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for stopping by and listening to another episode of Project Recovery. We are grateful for you who tune us in every week.
It's that podcast that we call Project Recovery.
I like what you're doing. I really don't. But in case you forgot, Project Recovery is what?
It's a KSL podcast.
Have you ever made a long story short?
Fun pig.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.